Welcome back to the All Hazards Prepper Show, your go-to spot for all your disaster prep information and how to survive wild SHTF scenarios. Plus, we'll chat about the chaos of the world, throw in weather updates, and cover any topics the All Hazards Prepper has in his head this week. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform and join us on social media. Now, let's welcome your fearless leader and the brains behind the All Hazards Prepper, Blake.
Welcome back to the All Hazards Prepper Show. This is your host, Blake. I hope everyone is having a safe week out there. I have an exciting guest today, someone who is a fellow emergency manager, someone that's been in the field for a long time. I've connected her on X, and she posts some great stuff on there. Her name is Ashley Morris. She is the Preparedness and Outreach Manager for Prince George's Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Management Division in Maryland. Previously has held several other local level emergency management positions within Maryland, Virginia, and even Texas for a total of more than 7 years within the emergency management field. Actually, is a certified emergency manager and recently graduated from the National Emergency Management Advanced Academy. Ashley was listed on the 2021 International Association Emergency Manager level or Region 3 40 professionals under 40 list. Ashley is a member of the Type 3 Maryland Incident Management Team and the National Capital Region Incident Management Team with a mission to bridge the two communities of meteorology and emergency management together. Ashley has been a member or participated in several meteorological and emergency management association and conferences. Ashley is currently pursuing her PhD in Emergency Management Administration from Oklahoma State University. Ashley has her master's in geography with an emphasis in natural hazards from Texas Tech University, and her research work was titled An Investigation of Social Vulnerability and Storm Resource Availability for Tornado Hazards in Lubbock, Texas. Her undergrad work dabbled in geophysics and even atmospheric science at Texas Tech University as well. So please welcome Ashley to the show. Ashley, I'm so glad that we have found a time finally to get on and really talk. You are I think the first fellow emergency manager that's on the show. So I'm excited to geek out a little bit on emergency management. And Ashley is with meteorology. She has that's her degree. That's what her specialization is in. So that's what kind of we're going to dabble in today. So Ashley, the first question we talked about. In your own words, can you describe to the average average person what emergency management is and how that relates to prepping in the prepping community?
Yeah, so basically, emergency management, I like to always tell people, is a fancy term for disaster management or just being ready for any kind of emergency or disaster. And so we spend a lot of hours, not only 8 to 5, but also after hours, working to prepare for emergencies and disasters, get ready for them, respond for emergencies and disasters, recover from emergencies and disasters, and then also mitigate or try to prevent those. And so obviously, as local level government emergency managers, we spend a majority of our time doing preparedness, doing emergency planning, working with our first response personnel, our government agencies, all of our partners, but also making sure that we utilize partnerships with nonprofits, the private sector, and everybody that it would take to actually respond to a disaster. We do a lot of training, we do a lot of disaster scenario work, we test our plans, we stock up, we make sure that we as a government and as emergency managers have supplies to be able to ramp up things like sheltering, make sure that our emergency operations center technology is prepared and ready, and do all of that stuff. So we spend a majority time doing preparedness, but obviously when we have threats and we actually have things materialize as emergencies and disasters, we do spend time doing response. We typically assist our residents in our communities with their needs during that, and then we work through the recovery and the mitigation process as well. And so during all of that, I would say it heavily relates to prepping because typically to be an emergency manager, you have to be able to look for that worst case scenario. So you've got to be able to identify the hazard, identify the what could happen and the worst case thing that could happen to you, and then act on that capacity of what would happen by taking action in preparing. Like I said, we do stock up on items that we would need not only logistically for response, but tools that first responders would need to help people. As emergency personnel, we also stock up and make sure that we have stuff for our own EOCs and our own personnel, food and water, because we can't manage a disaster or run on a disaster without our own supplies and things like that during the disaster. And so I would say the two topics heavily intertwine. And honestly, a lot of folks that lean into prepping technically would fit really well in the emergency management profession as professional emergency managers, maybe, or even volunteers who could really help us get out to the community and tell people how valuable it is to just think of those worst case scenarios sometimes and just be ready in the event that we might have that, because we're just starting to see a lot more disasters in the country nowadays.
That's great introduction there to emergency management, and that's what I do on a daily basis as well. And kind of off question we didn't talk about, but maybe explain to our viewers what a type 3 or type 1, type 2 incident management team is. It's something someone may a prepper or someone that's interested may hear in the news or run across, especially if you're out west or even in the east, even anywhere in the U.S. So maybe explain what an incident management team is and what your role on those are whenever you guys are activated.
Sure. So, an incident management team or an IMT are the specialized teams of personnel who do a lot of extra training. FEMA has quite a bit of curriculum in all hazards training and incident management training that you have to do. O5, all hazards response class, and then also position specific classes, typically in the incident command system or ICS position functions. And so many of us take a variety of different classes, either on planning, so being in the planning section, also operations section, logistics section, finance section. We also have folks who specialize in public information or getting information out about the disaster to the community. We have liaison specialists as well, so they work to make sure that we're doing a good job of getting information adjacently from other organizations that we are involved with, or maybe responders are a part of our response. And then also a safety officer, so somebody making sure that we're actually implementing safety procedures for our response and for our folks doing that. And so these specialized folks get this all hazards training so they can actually deploy as a team out to critical or complex incidents, and they can actually plug into those incidents and run those incidents. They, like I said, are heavy on using ICS as an organizational structure, making sure that we have good communication chains, chain of command, resource management, all of those fancy, really great things that FEMA likes to push down through NIMS. But IMTs are really great because, like I said, they really supplement what you have locally. Some areas in the country might not have a lot of emergency management personnel or staff who are trained to take on a disaster. So in the event that you have a wildfire in a rural community, or you have a tornado or anything that's really critical, these specialized teams that work really hard to train day in and day out will deploy out typically on like an EMAC request, and they'll take over that incident if they're given the right or the authority to do so by the local government. So I joined the IMT not only for Maryland, but also for the National Capital Region, just to enhance my own training. And honestly, I feel like as an emergency manager, it's important for me to get out to other disasters so I can train and I can also get experience with disaster management. That way, if it takes 10 years for my jurisdiction to get a disaster, I still have the experience. I'm not sitting on my heels waiting for my own local disaster. I'm getting out in the country and I'm actually serving on other disasters and learning before that day so I can make sure that I'm serving my community the best I can. So, I've rostered with both of those teams. I technically do planning section, so planning section chief, situational unit leader, resource unit leader, and I absolutely love planning section because I think that we're kind of the heart of organization for the incident management. We do all of the meeting management. We also put together the incident action plan, and we compile all of the tactics, objectives, and all of basically the response information into a plan that the responders can use. So I always feel like it's super important.
Yes, incident management teams are. It's cool to see what they can do and see what all they can accomplish compared to a county or state, and what from an EMAC request, what they are able to the resources and the types of people that come in. And these incident management teams, when I was working out in Wyoming, doing wildfire response, it was, I mean, those were like everything because, if for a local county emergency manager, I didn't have the resources, like Ashley was saying, to deal with some of the fires I was dealing with. So bringing in these incident management teams from the Forestry Service through the Bureau of Land Management, and all of these people, these federal resources, really brought in the experts and the skills and the people that we needed to run a large scale incident. And I think there's a lot of people that would get a lot from joining one of these incident management teams, even if you come from the fire or police or EMS or non-emergency management background. There's a lot to play into there. So perfect there with the incident management teams. As as an emergency manager, as a meteorologist, what are some disasters, some natural disasters, or even man-made disasters? This is an all hazards discussion. What are some things that you are seeing more today that we might have not seen when we first started in emergency management? I think it sounds like we probably both started around the same time, and it's crazy how different within last below 10 years has things have changed. So what's some things that you were seeing more that kind of keep you up at night?
Sure. So I would say definitely not only on the region out here, but even when I worked outside of the Austin area, when we're talking about natural disasters or natural hazards, flooding. So we're just seeing a ton of more flooding, especially in urban environments. And that's one of our top threats outside of the DC region is just urban flash flooding. We can have these summer thunderstorms pop up, and it doesn't have to be a particularly like severe day or a special day. It can just be a thunderstorm day, on June or July or August, and that one particular storm will just decide to drop 3 inches over the least porous part of the county, and we'll have some pretty severe flash flooding there. We'll have cars start floating. We have water rescues, things like that. And so I think learning how to navigate with the flooding risk and the increased rainfall rates and stuff we're seeing around the country, honestly, countrywide, there's a lot of different areas that are starting to break those rainfall records. Learning how to deal with that, and then also figuring out how we can navigate that with things like water systems. Obviously, we could do mitigation and we can enhance our wastewater and our water processing systems and things like that. But obviously, that takes a lot of time. And with the rapid changes that we're seeing in rainfall rates, it might be a little while before we can solve some of the stormwater and the water runoff area problems that we have in a lot of urban environments. So I would say definitely flooding. Second, I want to say tropical weather. So I know a lot of people have talked a lot about hurricanes, and some folks on here probably have heard something of what they call rapid intensification. We're just seeing a lot more tropical storms and just hurricanes sit in a very rich environment, not only on the Gulf Coast, but also in the Atlantic Ocean, where the oceans are really hot and the temperatures are pretty high. And those storms are able to rapidly intensify from a tropical storm or a category 1 all the way up to like a category 4 or sometimes even a category 5 or right on the boundary. And the problem with that is it's doing that so fast that a lot of our weather forecast models aren't quite good at predicting rapid intensification yet. And so we're starting to see a trend where we get a forecast of a storm that we think is going to be a category 3, but it does the RI process, and then right off the coast, it turns into a category 5. And for many emergency managers who work on the coast, the difference between a 3 and 5 is substantial. Your evacuation zones are different, your surge is different, the rainfall rates, like I was talking about before with flooding, is completely different. And so I think that's going to be a huge challenge for the hurricane-prone areas in the country to navigate, is this rapid intensification. How can we better prepare? And then also, how can we speed up our hurricane timelines? Because historically, a lot of state emergency management agencies and locals have tried to do this 3 days out in advance thing. But unfortunately, with RI, we're not getting 3 days anymore. Things are starting to spin up a lot faster, and you might be faced with a major hurricane in less than 24 to 48 hours. So how are you going to navigate that challenge? The last one I'll say too, just want to throw out cyber. So, I've been doing for 7, 8 years now. When I first started, you didn't hear a ton of people talking a lot about cyber, even though cyber was still a concern. But nowadays, I mean, cyber is everywhere. We're starting to see a lot more technology, not only in government operations, but everywhere. Hospitals, your critical infrastructure, things like that. And so a lot of us are spending a lot more time taking a look at the cyber threats and the cyber infrastructure stuff. And obviously, that's not natural, but it is a threat that a lot of us are taking pretty seriously and does keep us up at night. So,
Sure. Yeah, cyber is definitely, if it's even if it's by design through a hacker or something like that, or by accident, just like the CrowdStrike or AT&T. A lot of this stuff that we've seen over the last couple of months seems to be more of an a system flaw or an error on somebody doing something wrong on the back end. So it's crazy to and a lot of what the cyber is, we depend in businesses, hospitals, governmental agencies, even just the individual just depends so much on their phone, on their computer, on just technology in general today. And when one little thing fails, they lock up and they don't know what to do, and they don't recall or don't remember, or maybe not even ever experienced going back to times where we didn't have the phone right there and you had to use an alternative communication source, or have an email, or having to do something like definitely cyber is something I think a lot of emergency managers, a lot of people in critical infrastructure protection really have worried about, just because we've seen how easy it is for just a little mistake to throw off the whole system, let alone a hacking or a malware, or something that's by design of attack. And with the natural disasters, that's perfect. Those are I think today, and being on the East Coast, and you're on the East Coast as well, any emergency manager will say what you said is the flooding and the rapid intensification with tropical storms and hurricanes, and the just the flooding. I mean, we're seeing even here in North Carolina more flooding where we used to not, because of, most likely due to urbanization. We're putting too much concrete down, too many houses down, and the water has nowhere to go other than up. And when you do that, you have to, that's, and a lot of emergency managers, and a lot of people in the general public are not aware that emergency managers sometimes, or if they're really good into the county or city or wherever they're, the organization they're working in, they're, tying in with, land development and planning and stuff like that. To really plan around, hey, if we're going to build a development here, we need to look at stormwater runoff and retention ponds, and flooding, ways to decrease flooding through mitigation. But a lot of times, unfortunately, here in the U.S., we kind of do the back step, is we let it happen and then we go back and fix it, and then that's more costly and all of that. But FEMA's really taken an aim at trying to do it beforehand and not after a disaster happens. So perfect there. With your education in meteorology, what are some ways that the average person can really become more educated on the weather and how it can impact them? A lot of people today, there's a lot more resources, of course, today with smartphones, with apps, with notification software, or systems and stuff. But what are some ways the average person who has no clue about meteorology can really educate themselves, so that way they can look up in the sky, or they can, read a National Weather Service, daily briefing, and know, kind of what they're talking about, to really make decisions on based on the impacts and the hazards that are occurring.
Sure. So I have a few different ways that folks can make sure that they're prepared and informed about weather, because honestly, you can't really take action during a weather disaster or even prepare for it if you don't know how to be informed. So, first of all, you want to make sure to know your weather source. And so, this is becoming even more important as we have social media, we've got YouTube, we've got internet, we've got so many different ways to consume and also create information. So, it's really important that people know where they're getting their weather information from and who is making it. Obviously, folks that go to school for meteorology, they study weather forecasting, the science of the atmosphere, how to read models, things like that. They would be professionals at making weather forecasts and making sure to get the right information to you about a hurricane or something that's coming in. So we heavily encourage residents and other folks to check out the National Weather Service, NWS. There is an NWS office that serves every part of the United States. You can just Google NWS and put in your zip code and find your office. But they are the official government weather authority. So not only do they forecast across the country, they also issue watches and warnings officially as the only source to do so. And so it's important to be familiar with them and their information online. They do not have an app yet. Rumor has it that maybe they will have one in the future. So in the meantime, you either have to Google it on your computer or Google it on your phone for now. But you can pull up a 5-day forecast by them. You can see if you have weather warnings, watches, advisories on their website. You can also subscribe and get alerts via a bunch of different ways, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But just be cautious if you're getting weather information from bloggers or other sources on social media. There are plenty of other people that are still professional meteorologists that might not work for the National Weather Service, but you just have to be careful and you have to vet your sources, just like any other news sources or any other information you're getting from social media. Some folks really do just post that one model run of the worst case scenario that honestly in reality is not going to actually happen. So you don't want to be fooled or tricked looking at incorrect data or looking at a forecast by someone who hasn't been educated to do it yet. Right. Two, we definitely want people to get in the habit of checking the weather every day. Or if you know that active weather is coming up, starting to ramp up how often you're checking it. It's really great in the mornings if you could, while you're getting your cup of coffee, while you're having your breakfast or whatever, just pull up an app or just take a look at the news or something. But take a look at the forecast. We've learned that a lot of people actually are not aware when we have severe weather, tornadoes, hurricanes, different things forecasted. And once again, if you're not aware that the forecast is in place for severe weather, you're not going to be able to prepare for it. And then you're going to get kind of caught off guard when you get that tornado warning or that storm's coming at you. So please get in the habit of making sure that you do that. Check the weather. Step 3, you want to have 3 ways to get warnings. So 3 different technologies, 3 different modes of being able to get weather watches, advisories, and warnings. That could be cell phone apps, like the Red Cross app is a great one. The FEMA app is a great one. There's a few other really great storm apps that you can get for free. We also encourage the NOAA Weather Radio, which is a weather radio that is battery operated and can alert you of a tornado warning or any kind of hurricane warnings as well. NOAA weather radios have actually been known to save lives during tornado outbreaks, especially if you live in Tornado Alley. So that is an absolute valuable thing to have if you live in those areas. And then another method might be television. It could be weather alerts with your local emergency management alert system. Sign up for that, or a variety of different ways. But you want to make sure that you have 3 ways so that you have redundancy in the event that an app fails, we lose communications, or even like the NOAA weather radio towers go down. Next, also, we want to make sure that you're telling your family and your friends. So if you have family and friends that are living in a threat area, you want to make sure to tell them that there's a threat going on. Or if you see that someone gets a tornado warning, call them or text them and tell them. We're actually seeing a lot of research in the meteorological community that shows that when someone receives a text or a call from a family member saying, hey, you're in a tornado warning or you're at risk of bad storms, people will actually take action more. They trust their friends and family that tell them that more than hearing it on TV or just getting an app. So you might actually save your friends and family's lives by reaching out and just making them aware of the weather information as a trusted source. And then lastly, I just encourage everyone to know what your weather impacts are. Do you live in a floodplain, or do you live in an area that's prone to certain kinds of weather? What are those impacts that could be occurring to your property? And then how can you protect yourself from that? What's your insurance coverage look like? Do you have everything fully covered? Do you have flood insurance, which is super, super important? Can you do yard mitigation to maybe make sure that you can prevent fires on your property or flooding on your property or whatever? While we work in government and we do a lot of really great government mitigation projects, we cannot do private mitigation projects on private property. So we encourage residents to take action and protect their property so that we can kind of work together to do mitigation. But I think that's my 5 tips for that question.
Yeah, a lot to unpack there. That's usually when you ask an emergency manager or something like that. It's usually going to get a quite long response, which is great. I've really everything you said was what I would say. The average citizen can be more educated and more prepared. It makes the emergency manager's job in that local municipality or county or city or wherever you live a whole lot easier. So if you can, go out and go to your yard and look where it floods, and if you got a storm drain, just go clear the storm drain before a storm comes, especially if you live in the city. Just clearing that out. And sometimes cities and local municipalities will do it before storms, but just keeping it clear on the sun, throughout the year really can help when if a big storm comes and changes something. So anyway,
Yeah.
perfect there. Yep. Yeah, go ahead.
Now, I was just going to say, and I want to echo too, there's absolutely nothing wrong with calling in if you see something clogged up or you see that the city needs to come in and unclog some drains or do something like that. Please report that. Many municipalities have either like a 311 system or maybe a DPWT line or some kind of way to report that stuff. Please be persistent and get that into the government. Hold a little bit of accountability. We obviously do that, and we try to keep an eye out on how we can prevent storm damage. But like I always like to tell my community, many of us don't know that we need to solve a problem unless the problem is reported. So be loud and tell us when we need to get out there to fix some of that stuff.
Exactly, reporting things to local authorities. That's just in general. I feel like the average citizen today, if you're going through your city and you see something, that's doesn't look right. If it's a power line that's kind of low hanging, or a tree or something like that. Sometimes the city or the county doesn't have the resources to go out and inspect everything. But if you can report it as a citizen, that's even better. Kind of going into prepping here, we've kind of hit on some emergency management, hit on some meteorology. Let's talk about, from your point of view as as an emergency manager, as a meteorologist, what is something that everyone should have that really helps during all hazardous disasters? What's that resource that you've seen as an emergency manager that might save a family, save a person, or really help them out and help them recover, or if they have this resource?
So I think we always like to preach preparedness and prepping and all of that. But sometimes we get in a habit of always saying, the food supply, the water supply, which honestly, if you had a catastrophic event, like, you're cut off from everyone, we're talking like nuke or something, I think some of those supplies would be really helpful. But for the typical disaster, we have a lot of plans to make sure that we can provide food and water for most people that are impacted. And so we tend to de-emphasize food and water for prepping, but we do emphasize the things that we typically see people need for recovery and things like that, like documentation. People don't really think about what they need to save to go through the recovery processes, what you might need if you need to access a shelter, how you can get to that shelter, and then even things as simple as just like making sure that you have a cell phone charger, battery packs, some stuff like that. That can really actually help you during some of these disasters where, honestly, we have all of our ducks in a row. We're able to get people out, evacuate people, and do all of that stuff. But maybe you just need to make a phone call, or maybe you need to get that information to somebody, and you don't have that ability to in the event that we had that. Another tool that we typically see a lot of people need, honestly, first aid kits are really helpful, and having the skills. So we're starting to actually teach people not only to prep and supply their households with things they might need, but what are the skills? Because we tend to see people get into some really tricky situations during disasters. You might be trapped in a home. How are you going to get out of that home? You might have somebody, need first aid and stop the bleed, stuff like that. So we're really encouraging that as an aspect of preparedness and making sure that you have ready. Lastly, I don't think that we can really overemphasize the need for vehicle preparedness. So making sure that folks have really good vehicle maintenance if possible, kits and supplies in your vehicle in the event that you need to just get out and sustain for a while, but also in the event that your car breaks down, even on a typical day. Just having those supplies and being able to handle everything from a battery issue, a tire issue, an overheating issue, making sure that you're staying alive if it's really hot, really cold, all of those things. And then just being able to have the tools to withstand that disaster, basically.
Yes, that those are great. And I just did a post the other day actually on my Instagram and Facebook about vehicle preparedness because it amazes me, how little prepared people are whenever it comes to their vehicle. We spend, I mean, if you're, I mean, I spend almost an hour a day, if well, probably more, in my truck, and it's amazes me. You pull off on the side of the road and some sort of tool or something that I've carried over the last few years really helped me. If it's broke down on the side of the road or even just somewhere, I'm at a friend's house or a family member's house and need something and helpful that has been to be prepared. And kind of a going off topic again. So you are an outreach part is, part of your job in preparedness. And I think you oversee your municipality's CERT program. Could you maybe talk about CERT real quick and what CERT is? And if someone, I think some of our listeners may be interested in something like this, talk maybe about how they could join and what really CERT can do. Talking about building skills and things like that, I think CERT would be a great thing we could kind of talk about here.
Absolutely. So CERT is a really great program and I absolutely love it. I had an opportunity to build a CERT up in Texas before I came out here. And I can tell you, CERTs are valuable to the small municipalities as well as the large ones for multiple different reasons. But CERT stands for Community Emergency Response Team. And so these CERT teams are made up of residents, folks passionate about being prepared, prepping, wanting to be survivors, wanting to help. And so we recruit folks to come in and take our basic CERT training, which tends to give people skills in everything from basic fire suppression to basic first aid, disaster survival skills. I think they also teach a little bit of cribbing, search and rescue, stuff like that. And so at the end of this training, we typically will give folks an ability to either join the team formally or just kind of be a CERT helper in the community, educating people on preparedness. But the coolest thing about this is once we roster a team, we continue to train them. So we might provide them additional training on traffic management, food and water distribution, shelter management, all of these different skills that they would need if they're going to come out and help us with disasters. And then in the event that we have a disaster exercise where we might need some hands, or we have a real disaster, we will actually do a call out and we will deploy these volunteers as a part of our response to help us with things we need. These could be, once again, hands in our emergency operations center doing documentation or taking calls. They could be assisting with our 311 center. They also could be helping us with shelter staffing, which in a lot of jurisdictions, having enough people to do shelter staffing is always a challenge. So we're looking for volunteers like that. A variety of different things. So CERT is an absolute wonderful program that I definitely encourage everyone to take a look at. If you do not currently have a CERT established already in your community with your emergency management office, you actually technically through FEMA can establish your own team. So you can start a CERT program or kind of help lead that effort. The only thing that FEMA asks is that you make sure to get an endorsement through either a local emergency management office, a fire department or a police department or somebody in public safety so they can kind of vet for you. But once you have that, you go and you apply on the FEMA website, you put in all your paperwork, and you'll have a local team in no time. So it's an absolute wonderful program. And at the least, even if we never have a disaster, we have a cadre of passionate preparedness folks that have the skill set to respond, but also help us promote preparedness in their neighborhoods, at their HOAs, and in the community to help build resiliency for the future.
Yeah, CERT is a great program. It's something that I've seen here in the Carolinas really taken off over the last few years, and I didn't even know that. Learned something new today that if you can just go to FEMA and start your own local CERT team, if the county or municipality had that, I didn't even know that was a thing. So that's good to know. Yeah, and really, I think CERT and a lot of these different things is really, like Brock Long, the former FEMA administrator, he said it's really just building a culture of preparedness. That's something that here in the U.S. we kind of lack and we really need to really gain on is having a culture of preparedness, and CERT really helps back that up and building people today. It's amazing they don't know basic first aid, they don't know basic even fire suppression. I served on a fire department for a little while, and it was amazing going to a house and they just had like a little grease fire, stove fire, something simple, and they just let it burn and then caused the whole house to catch on fire. And I'm like, you could have used your fire extinguisher, you could have cut off the oxygen source, you could have just kept the oven closed, or put up a lid on the pot, and it would have stopped it. But now your house is on fire. So I think those skills are something that everyone can take of. So if you're interested in the start class, definitely go reach out to your local county or city municipality emergency management. They can definitely point you in the right direction if they have a program. If they don't, maybe that will help them. If they get enough interest, maybe they'll help doing that. So, Ashley, kind of wrapping up here, since we've, this episode really highlighted on the emergency management and meteorology, where do you see the field of emergency management going here in the future? There's a lot of changes going on in the world. There's a lot more disasters, natural, man-made, technological. Where is this field in your view, especially for someone with so many degrees and certifications and involvement? Where is this field going in your point of view?
That's a great question. So I think a lot of us are asking that, especially after the pandemic, because a lot of folks thought emergency management would definitely blossom, and it definitely is growing. You're seeing a lot more opportunities for crisis management, but also business continuity, and also just emergency management related jobs in different sectors. So that's definitely growing pretty fast. But in terms of like agency growth and maybe even like government funding from local levels and things like that, we're not quite seeing the growth that some would expect, even though we're seeing a ton more disasters, and we're honestly being asked to handle a lot more hazards. We have a lot more human-based threats. You can't forget, acts of violence, terrorism, protests, things like that. We have quite a bit of those nowadays. We also have the technological. So like I said, all the cyber stuff, all the additional hazards that come with the technology changes we have. And besides the weather, I mean, we also still have earthquake threats in the country and just a variety of different threats. And so, what I hope to see is the growth of local level emergency management programming in terms of local level funding. And I think the only way we're really going to see that is if we have folks of the prepper community, but also just everyday civilians and citizens and residents going to their elected officials and saying, hey, we want our community to be ready. We want mitigation projects in our community. We want to be ready as a community. We want taxpayers to fund emergency management more. Typically, emergency management's just not on the high priority list, like fire departments, police departments, and other things. And unfortunately, when you don't have the staff, the capacity, and the funding from that local level outside of the grants, we can only do so much, right? So hoping to see a growth in the local level. I do think we're going to continue to see a lot of busy action. But my concern, once again, is if we don't grow the staff in counties and cities to handle it, we're just going to deal with a lot of emergency managers who are just very burned out. We're starting to see a lot of emergency managers assigned resiliency projects, everything from opioids to homelessness to food resiliency and food banks, and just a variety of different topics that emergency management didn't deal with years ago. And so to deal with that, we really need more staff. But finally, I'm really hoping too in the future that we'll continue to inspire our younger populations to want to be emergency managers. For years, emergency management's kind of just been that catch-all in public safety of, hey, who wants to volunteer and be a disaster manager, or who wants to retire from police or fire or public safety and come do this as a second gig, which was great. But like we keep talking about, we have so many threats nowadays and the job requires so much work. So I'm really hoping that our profession will continue to professionalize and we'll start to recruit some of you listeners out to come be emergency managers, but also some fresh college graduates to come out and make emergency management their full-time profession for the next 40 to 50 years of their career, hopefully. So we'll just have to see how it goes.
Emergency management is like you said, it could be a catch-all field where a lot of people just they're former fire, EMS, police, military, whatever the past life was, and they kind of got into this and they learn as they go, which is great. That background really helps, but it's great to see degree programs out there, especially like PhD and master's programs that have really taken off over the last few years. And it all goes back to the funding thing, though. Is the lack of funding is certainly a concern from my point of view, even as an emergency manager. Usually with the lack of funding, it brings that lack of staffing and then the burnout and all of that, and it all adds up. And then next thing you know, your organization's dwindled down their emergency management department, or it's used to be 2 people, now it's 1. And what I've seen a lot too in and other, facets of emergency management. If in higher ed, schools, healthcare, they get tasked with other things that are not emergency management. And, that really, drives that person that hopefully wanted to do emergency management out to, do something that's, a little bit more of their passion. So that's something that definitely I've seen happen as well. They get, so definitely some great points there. Ashley, I am so glad that you have joined us on the show today. It was a great conversation. I really think there's some great points. If you're a prepper, if you're just starting out, you've been in a while, we're definitely going to advertise this show too towards the emergency management and meteorology community. So maybe someone learned something, they got something from that as well. So I hope it continues to, make sure you subscribe to the show, like the show wherever you're listening to us, and following us on our social media accounts, and making sure you get all your notifications turned on for the podcast as well. Hope everyone has a great day and stay safe out there. The All Hazards Prepper out.